Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever found yourself just staring out a window, thinking back to a very specific moment in your past, and wondering, what if? You know the feeling. What if I had taken that other job offer? What if I had chosen to study art instead of business? Or even something simple, like what if I just left the house 5 minutes earlier? It's this deeply universal human experience. We literally all have these sliding door moments where our lives could have splintered off into entirely different directions. Well, welcome to today's explainer. We're taking a super fascinating look at the actual mechanics of those very thoughts. We are going to deconstruct the personal narrative by examining a specific case study from our source text, just to uncover exactly how compelling stories about our life choices are constructed. And I promise, by the end of this, you won't just understand this narrative style, you're going to have the exact blueprint to craft your own. To get us started, I want to pose a question directly to you. And this is drawn straight from our source materials warm-up exercise. Basically, how do people actually decide on a field of study or a job, and what specific factors influence that choice? Just take a second to think about your own major life decisions. Did you have this perfect master plan all plotted out on a spreadsheet? Or was your path influenced by family expectations, maybe a sudden financial need, or honestly, just pure unpredictable chance? Keep your own personal journey in the back of your mind here, because it's going to make the case study we're about to explore highly, highly relatable. All right, let's get into Section 1, Anatomy of a Decision, the Reluctant Teacher. Now, what's absolutely fascinating about this case study is the sheer unpredictability of the human path it represents. Our protagonist here didn't start out wanting to be at the front of a classroom. In fact, his story is literally a masterclass in career detours. So, he originally wanted to go to art school, right? But he changed his mind after realizing just how incredibly hard it was to find employment in that field. Then he kind of just floated through various courses: typing, shorthand, French, literature. He worked as a public relations assistant, then a shop assistant. At one point, he even agreed to do an interview for a brand new airline company. But while he was helping out at his uncle's language center, he got so incredibly busy that he totally forgot to check back with the airline recruiter. He essentially ghosted the airline, stayed at the language center, and then, later that exact same evening, he was offered his first teaching job. I mean, he stumbled into his life's calling almost entirely by accident. But see, a truly great personal narrative isn't just a chronological list of jobs you didn't end up taking. It's all about the internal emotional drivers behind those choices. Consider his initial dream of going to art school. He writes in the text that he was reluctant to go ahead with it because, quote, "my father was likely to disapprove in a quiet but very noticeable manner," end quote. He mentions his dad wanted him to study medicine. And as a reader, wow, we instantly understand that heavy, unspoken family pressure. The author doesn't need to write out some melodramatic, explosive scene about a screaming match with his dad. He just uses this one carefully chosen phrase, quiet but noticeable disapproval. It perfectly communicates his internal struggle and those invisible forces that were shaping his timeline. Which brings us to Section 2, Manipulating the Timeline, the Writer's Secret. A compelling narrative actively shapes time, and this next part brilliantly illustrates how a non-linear approach creates a way stronger story. Our source material challenges the reader to look closely at the text and asks, hey, are all the events presented in chronological order? And the answer is a hard no. The author intentionally writes them completely out of order. For example, he starts a paragraph with, "after I finished school," but then he immediately flashes back, stating, "I had originally wanted to go to art school," which obviously indicates a desire from way before he finished school. Later, he mentions taking a teaching methodology course long before he actually describes getting his very first teaching job. Actually, scratch that. It's not just jumping around randomly. By shifting back and forth like this, the writer provides the absolutely necessary context right when you, the reader, need it most, rather than just delivering a super dry, boring timeline of events. It just builds a much better, way more engaging narrative. Furthermore, look at how the author expertly controls the pacing of the narrative, using very specific time phrases. Notice how he speeds through literally entire years of his life with broad brushstrokes. Phrases like, "after I finished school," or "I chose to try out a number of things." These address massive periods of time super briefly. Because let's be honest, we don't need the day-to-day details of his shorthand class, right? But when the narrative reaches its climax, that critical moment of the missed airline opportunity, bam, time suddenly slows way down. He uses precise phrases like, "2 days later, the man I knew from the airline company turned up and accused me of being irresponsible. And then, later that evening, I was offered my first teaching job." He zooms in like a movie camera, focusing on this crucial 48-hour window, simply because that is exactly where the entire pivot of his life occurs. Okay, moving on to Section 3. Two diverging paths,
brainstorming alternate realities.
So the absolutely crucial point here is establishing contrast. The source material provides a highly effective, albeit slightly extreme, brainstorming example to help us do this. You map out your life now, maybe feeling like life is not quite good enough, being totally broke, and struggling to pay rent for a tiny apartment. Then you contrast that against how life would have been different if you just made that one different choice. In this imagined alternate reality, suddenly you are the CEO of a massive company, living in a beautiful, large villa and just spending a ton of money every single day. While it's a bit over the top for sure, this exercise perfectly demonstrates a core concept, creating a stark, night and day contrast between your current reality and a wild speculative reality generates the exact dramatic tension required to really anchor your personal narrative. Let's pull the whole shebang together in Section 4, the Writing Corner Playbook, Building Your Narrative. Let's see how all of this builds into an actionable step-by-step process straight from the source's writing corner. All right, step 1, reflect on what has already happened. Really evaluate the choices you made and the specific opportunities that were sitting right there at the time. Step 2, wonder and speculate on how things might have been different. This is where you use that extreme brainstorming contrast we literally just talked about. Step 3, address the question to your reader directly. Make them a real part of the conversation by setting the context up clearly. And finally, step 4, wrap it up by expressing either deep satisfaction or profound regret about your decision. In our specific case study today, the reluctant teacher ended his story by stating that despite all the crazy ups and downs, teaching genuinely became his life's choice, and absolutely no amount of wondering would ever make him regret it. So, I want to leave you with this final kind of provocative thought today. If you had made that one different choice in your own life, the big one you always secretly wonder about, would you really be living in that metaphorical villa as a high-flying CEO, or would you simply be facing a completely different, equally exhausting set of complex problems? The real beauty of the speculative personal narrative isn't actually about living in the past at all. It's about gaining a much richer, much deeper appreciation for the exact spot where you are standing right now. I highly, highly encourage you to take the playbook we broke down today and just try drafting your own story. You honestly might be surprised by what you learned about yourself. Thanks so much for joining me on today's Explainer, and as always, keep learning.